You guys, I made a huge mistake. I feel so silly. I recorded a video. It's probably my favorite video I've ever recorded. And I just went and looked at it because I was going to just kind of clip the ends and get it ready for uploading to the channel. There's no audio. I look cute on it. I'm talking about exactly the way that I wanted to talk about it. I think I told a couple of cute stories. I can't hear anything. The learning curve on video, talking directly to camera and capturing it is, I don't know, maybe because I'm old and I didn't grow up with this kind of technology. It's just a steep learning curve. Oh, yikes. So today I'm going to share with you a thought that I have, a kind of an overview. And what I think is the first of a series of videos that I'm going to call the Alchemy series. And in this video, I want to explain what I'm talking about with the alchemy before we get into the details. So what I'm talking about with alchemy, and I'm using that word because I think it's magic, like I think there's magical things happening. Now, of course, with alchemy, there are chemical processes that we don't understand and an actual mix it up and get something to come out of it. But the way that I'm imagining alchemy is sort of in the magical, right? And so the magic of, to me, of good therapy, like really productive and worthwhile therapy, is a little bit of a magic process. And I've broken down that magic into what I think of as sort of these three elements. So the three elements are the sort of the personality and temperament and goals, etc. of the client, like their vibe, if you will. Same about the clinician, like their style, their personality, right? So just like in a like if you're dating somebody, like there's either chemistry or there's not. And we don't have an explanation for that. Some people have an explanation for that. I guess imago clinicians have an explanation for that. But our experience of it is just kind of magical. Like, we either have the chemistry or we don't. So those are the two elements, right? Client, clinician, and sort of their vibe or their personality, but also their style and their approach. And then the third element is, and I think this is the piece that gets, well, all those pieces actually get missed. The piece that often we don't think about is the model that clinician is using. And culturally, the way that we understand, like the way that we think about therapy, at least in our culture as I sit here, which is California raised, American my whole life. I've spent very little time in other countries and really kind of very little time outside of the state of California. And so in my experiencing of the world and the sort of pop culture of what's talked about in how therapy is talked about, we're not really talking about the model, but we keep playing around with it. Like pop culture keeps playing around with it. Like there's this show right now. It's 2023 as I record this. There's this show with Harrison Ford and I can't think of who else is in it. But anyway, it's a depiction of a therapist group, a group of clinicians. And they're playing around with this idea of models of therapy, not just personality, but like, one clinician's doing like in vivo therapy and the other one is definitely doing like a psychoanalytic approach, and somebody's definitely CBT in that, right? So we're dancing around it when and the movie Phil Stutz movie that just came out probably 6 or 8 months ago, also is dealing with the theme of model, but it's not really something we talk about in a doctor's office when you say, I think I have some anxiety, and they're like, well, you should go to a therapist. They're not saying like, maybe you should go to a therapist who has this particular model that they work in because you seem to be struggling with XYZ. It's that latter part that we're not really understanding, and I would like to help us break it down a little bit. So that's the intention of this alchemy series. So What do I mean by those three different elements? But there are other elements that are out there, like money is a big element, time, convenience, the unit, the treatment unit. So a therapist would think of that as like an individual or a couple or family who's coming in. Also is in it, but I don't think that's where the magic is. So I'm focusing on the magical parts. So what do I want to say? I was thinking in my head, do I want to share my view of magic? And I do just want to say a little bit, not my view of magic, but like a little thought I had just now that you probably watched go across my face. And then I was like, should I say it or should I not say it? I'm going to go ahead and say it. So, I'm a Santray therapist and I do a lot of work in the Santray. If I'm dealing with my own like clinical self, like who I am as a clinician, and I'm working on an issue related to that, I will often use a wizard to represent how deep, this is how deeply I feel that it's magical when it goes well, when you get these three elements right, because there is an experience of it feels magical to me. And so when I'm working in the Santray, I do use a wizard often to depict that. I'm just going to peek. Don't actually have a wizard right here in my tray next to me, which is disappointing. But anyway, okay, so let me get back on track. So the elements of the alchemy, the magic, is with the client's personality and temperament and the clinician's personality and temperament, and then the model that we're using to guide the therapy. So we'll start with the client. So what do I mean about the sort of personality and the view of the client? It's actually kind of a hard one to understand about yourself because a lot of times, probably people consuming my content haven't been to therapy. And so they don't know what they're like what version of themselves is going to come into the therapy room. Hopefully all of the versions of themselves, and not like in a dissociative identity way, just in sort of like, I went into therapy and I was in a super bad mood, and went into therapy and I was like irritated about the drive over, or I was irritated. I had hurt feelings about what the clinician had said to me, things like that. Or I was like in such a good mood today and I came into therapy and I had a lot of energy. You might come into therapy wanting to like dig deep, and some days you just want to just kind of talk about what you saw in the latest reality show, right? Like all of the versions of you would hopefully be welcomed in your therapy. But I'm kind of talking about with the alchemy, like what is it that you're bringing to your therapy? Like, I'll give you an example. If I am the client in therapy, I'm a therapist, number one, so I'm deep on the analysis. Like, I want to know it all the way. I want to know it fully. I want to know it deeply. Like, I'm not about the surface. Like, don't ask me how my day was. I don't really want to talk about that. I want to get to the work of it. So I'm also, personality-wise, kind of like, let's get into it. I'm also an introvert, and so I need help to get over the initial fear of kind of getting into it. What else? Oh, I have a really, I have a view as a client, but also as a clinician, that that therapy should include like laughter and often, crying, although not necessarily. I want somebody that thinks I'm funny and that I think can be funny, and they might take some of the heavy stuff that I bring up and maybe make light of it just in a connected way. So that's, if I'm looking for a clinician, I am looking for a personality that can resonate with that. And if I've got somebody who's doesn't like that, I hate to say the word serious, because therapists who are serious also have levity and whatever, but more like a therapist who is like, I don't want that element, that wouldn't be a good fit for me. And I want to encourage people really an experience of therapy as a client should be one that is like helping you bring who you are out in whatever way. A lot of times that's through talk. It's not the only way, and that's part of what we get into with models. But knowing kind of like, what is the vibe? So one way you might think about it is, if you've been to therapy before, do a little retrospective with yourself. Who have I resonated with well? Who helped me bring more of myself into the room? Who helped me gain insight? And what was it about their personality that was a good fit or wasn't a good fit? And that's also something that most therapists will ask. What worked for you well with your last clinician, and what did not work well with your last clinician? So that's about you and your personality. At the top of everybody's list would be things like, I want a clinician who makes me feel safe. Like, I had a client describe it to me once when she shared traumatic things with me, and when I responded in a really solid way, like I didn't have a big reaction. I mean, I cry a lot as a clinician, so I definitely would be teary, but it wouldn't be like hysterical tears, or it wouldn't be like, like I didn't demonstrate easily shocked. I mean, clinicians are doing a lot of things to manage their internal emotional climate. But she felt like I wasn't easily spooked, I think was the language that she used. Like, I felt safe because when I told you these things, you weren't easily spooked. And that was an important part of why she felt safe with me. Okay, so safety, security, sense of humor, intelligence, and the ability to speak in a way that matches the way you want somebody with intelligence. And that's very different for each person. So don't be afraid to think about that part of it. Like, I might want a clinician who is that informs me. So I want somebody who has more knowledge. I mean, not just therapy-wise, but like in the world wants more knowledge. That's not what I'm looking for personally, but that might be something that you're looking for. Also, like the client. Okay, so that's kind of the client side of things, and then there's the clinician side of things. And when I'm bringing up this point, I actually am talking to clinicians. What kind of clients do you want to work with? And I don't think we should feel bad about that. Like, here's an example of me as a clinician. Not to make it the Debbie Show, but I struggle with depression. I have struggled with depression my whole entire life. It's not debilitating. Mostly it's not debilitating depression. Unless I'm in a particularly bad episode, but I have learned a lot of ways to deal with it. But I'll tell you, a lot of people go to therapy to get help with depression. That's not a good fit for me. Am I able to be helpful? Yes. I know a lot about it. I think I have a good view on how to attend to it, how to care for that part of us instead of like damaging ourselves further with like, why can't you this and why can't you that kind of language. But for me as a therapist, it's not good for me to take on clients that struggle with severe depression. It undoes me in ways that are, even though I'm helping somebody, which is a lot of what drives me, I want to be a helpful person. But it's just not a good thing that I do to myself. I think it has to do with energy. So I have to hold a lot of energy for therapy, and somebody with depression isn't really able to access their energy, and they need people to kind of like lend it to them so they can get a hold of it. And in my experience of it, like that usually comes at a cost for me. So I'm speaking to clinicians about the alchemy for you. Like, what is equal to that for you? Like, which clients help you feel magical and which kinds of clients are depleting? So it's not that you don't care about the issue. Here's another example. A lot of times clinicians who are like dealing with young children at home, like 2s and 3s and 4s, they don't want to do work with 2s and 3s and 4s because they're doing it all the time, and so then they're not really getting to exercise different parts of them. And I want to say to clinicians, like, it's okay to think about what brings out your most magical therapist self. I mean, don't be a jerk about it. And if somebody comes to you and they have a 2, 3, and 4-year-old, for example, or they're struggling with depression, like, give them that unconditional positive regard. Love them, care for them. But if it's not going to bring out your magical self, or it actually might be a little bit detrimental or overwhelming to you, let's get that person over to another person. So, like in my office, I'm dealing with some physical limitations because I just have some problems that I'm awaiting surgery, and it's hard for me to get down on the ground. And I don't want to do therapy with kids if I can't get on the ground and play a game with them. I love working with kids. I love play therapy. It's very, very painful for me to get down and get back up until I've had my surgery and my recovery, and then maybe I get to go back to that kind of work. So I'm not the right clinician. I'm not able to be my magical self. Yes, can I do other things with kids and play therapy? Sure. But the magical version of me wants to be down on that ground, right? So I need to refer out. And I've got Michelle in my office who is able to get down on the ground and is lovely with children. So why wouldn't I send them over to Michelle? I will. Okay, so that's about the clinician and so for clinicians, for anybody who is a therapist or a therapist in training or thinking about a future as a clinician, think about what kinds of clients help you feel your best. Like, before, am I dreading this session? During, am I alive to this? And then after, like, am I sapped, or do I feel like, not every single session, but overall, I did 10 sessions, and one time I didn't feel good after. But the rest of the time it felt like it was a great connection, and I feel really positive about the work we're doing. And, clinicians need to be working in their zone of magic. Okay, and then the model. Okay, so the model is a little bit harder to get at unless you are a therapist. So, and that is the main reason why I want to do the series, is I really want, people to understand that, like, you should know what you're bringing to the room as a client. You should know what you're bringing to the room as a clinician. Is there chemistry there? But the other element is, what model of therapy? And, we could go on a rant about the kinds of things that are well known or what is referred out to. But you'll hear things like, you should see a CBT clinician. You should see a DBT. You need to go through a course in DBT. You need to go to ACT. You need to go to EFT. You need to go to EMDR. That's a lot for people to understand. And I feel like it's not talked about at all. And that's a disservice because, well-meaning people will say things like, you need to go to therapy. Let's say you go to the doctor because let's say you go to the emergency room because you're convinced you're having a heart attack, and they do the EKG and they assess you and they're like, your heart is fine. How's your stress been? And do you struggle with anxiety? They're going to be referring you to a clinician. Right? Lots of emergency room referrals out to therapists for anxiety, because it does, if you're having a panic attack, you do feel like you're going to die. So you will often end up in an emergency room. The emergency room staff doesn't understand the models of therapy or what you're going to be like in the room as a clinician, or what you're going to be like in the room as a client. Like, they don't know that. So they can't really, other than saying like, I recommend that you get some help, they're not going to really be able to guide you on who's a good fit for the kind of help that you need. Does that make sense? So that is what I want to break down in our Alchemy series. Is kind of like for, the type of client that you are and the type of clinician is a good resonance for you, or for clinicians, what type of client is a good resonating for you, but then also what model is most effective. And so I would like to be helping to educate you guys on the different models and the different styles of therapy. And so there's a little bit of overlap in terms of style and personality and model. But I think we can kind of organize our thoughts in that way in terms of those three elements. So hope you will enjoy this series. If you have kind of questions about any of those elements, leave that for me, and I will try to explore that with you as we go forward in this series. So this is episode number 1 of the Alchemy series, and I'm looking forward to putting together a lot of ways of just exploring this in more depth, including like YouTube videos of it or cultural references to it and that kind of thing. So I hope you will enjoy me. I hope you will join me as we explore. I hope you enjoy me as well. But I hope you will join me as we explore some of these different elements of alchemy. See you on the next one.